watching the way that other speakers use audience. Let them watch public speakers. The inaugural speech. How was audience a factor in that? Watch those things. Or read speeches. Who was listening? Use the Gettysburg Address. We're doing a lot of stuff this year with Lincoln in his... I don't know how many books are out this time. I'm like, there's a great book. Some of y'all may know it. This is way off the topic, and I'm running out of time. But that connects Lincoln and Darwin. It's really, it's really fascinating. Anyway, let your students then see that that kind of audience shifts everything about their inquiry, their writing, and their thinking. Okay, now, I've got my last picture.
Double click. There you go.
Okay, all right. If you all will, you have in your packet a little bibliography that I gave you. This is your bright I was trying to think of what word. Sheet. On one side, and I won't spend time talking about this because we're going to run out of time, but I put some of the skills I knew you all were really concerned with, and I just gave you some books and articles that I think are interesting and might be really helpful to you as you're trying to think about what to do with them. But what I want you to do now is turn that sheet over, and you see this little thing of Osceola. And that's the guy you see up there. Okay? What I would really like to do is to talk about the relationship between that and this. This is a description of Osceola, a sort of historical look at him. And I did choose Osceola because I know it's Seminole from Florida. If I had known that Geronimo had been in the fort in prison, I'd have chosen him, but I didn't know that until last night. So here's Mr. Osceola. I don't know if you can see this well enough. If you look at the very last sentence in that paragraph, you see a physical description. In physique, Osceola was described as tall, slender, and straight, with a countenance pleasing, though of somewhat melancholy cast. Hard to tell in that picture, isn't it? Let's see if this one, how do I get that one to say goodbye?
Click the red, yeah, click the red.
Okay, let's see this. There he is. That one picture shows him tall, slender, and straight. Now we get a better look at his face. What I would like to do, if I were going to use this, is to have my students look at the linguistic text, the written text, to see how much it reflected, matched, or challenged the visual text. There's a whole lot of drawings of Osceola, actually. I just chose these two, one from a distance and one close up. But you can see, you see a lot of different ones. Osceola, my father loved Osceola. And one reason he did was because Osceola had been, I know y'all know this story, he was sucker punched is what he was, right? He thought he was under the flag of truce, and they said, sorry, put him in prison. If you've ever been to the fort at St. Augustine, have you all? Then you know that there's a little room where he was kept in prison when he escaped. And my daddy, I remember, took me there, and he said, see how he had to climb up. And so Osceola was always this like heroic figure to me when I was a little girl. I guess because my daddy told the story. At any rate, what I would want from a task like this in teaching the whole idea of character, of person, because that's the third thing I think we need to teach, is how to develop persona, our own writer's self. I would begin with a character, and I would show the difference between the written version of something and the visual. The way, not even just the difference, but the way those two connected. If you look at that text you have, I would ask you all, and I would ask students, is this text descriptive? Is it an argument? Is it explanatory? Is it analytical? Can you read down for just a minute and tell me whether you think it's a descriptive, whether it feels, or I think it's several of them. Can you find any one place where you think it's descriptive or analytical or making an argument or tell a story? Read it for just a second. Can you? Because this is a question I would ask my college students. Where is a sentence that seems to be definitional? Definition. First part, right? Where it says this is where the name comes from. Really interesting to me. Why do they care where that name comes from? What is that telling us? Why did that writer put it in there? Interesting. Do you see any place that you would say is argumentative? Is making some kind of argument? Go down a little bit. Come on, come on. It's got a point to make. I think all of this part of General Jessup, maddened by the public cry for more energetic action, seized Osceola and his attendants while holding a conference under a flag of truce. Do you hear that? You can hear that voice in there that's a little bit aggrieved at this. I want my students to recognize that, the voice underneath that. If your students come to you and say that they don't like history, one reason is that they have a hard time hearing voice. I want my students to understand that when they hear voice, that's something they can develop in themselves, and I want them to develop that voice. Maybe of all things, I want my students to have a voice. And how do they develop a voice? They develop it because they've got questions to ask. They know how to ask them. Because they understand how to listen for their own voice in the chorus of voices that are part of their classroom and their small groups and the things they read. And they develop a voice because they hear, they see the development of tone and voice in the things they read. Point out those things to students, and you help them develop in their own minds a sense of their own writer's self, their own writer's voice. And starting with a historical figure and hearing how that historical figure is described is one way of thinking about persona. One way of thinking about voice. One tiny thing, y'all. I oftentimes with my students ask them when they turn in a paper to write a little tiny character description of them as the writer. Who'd you sound like? What do you sound like? Who are you? I don't want to tell them. I want them to tell me. We oftentimes at the end of an essay ask students to say, if you had more time, what would you do? Just ask them